Hey, 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 ho, ho, ho. It's Feedback Gaming here, talking about the current meta of tank designs in single player versus the AI. However, some of these designs and what you've learned from these designs can translate over to multiplayer. Anywho, this is a standard game of 1936 as Germany. And not only am I going to give you tank designs, but I'm going to show you how you progress your tank designs from the very beginning of the game as you progress further on. Because not every tank that you design is going to be one you will use at one set time. You will not make the perfect design. You will start off with something that's a little bit crappy and you will develop into something pretty amazing. So first of all, let's talk about old tank meta. Old tank meta was to add on an armored recon, which would give you a little bit of armor, which would give you the ability to not be penetrated. Well, not be penetrated if you were up against if you were up against anti-tank or anti-air, for instance, you would get penetrated. But the way it would work is you would add lots and lots of armor onto a single tank, say sloped armor, for instance, and would give it a little bit more extra armor, and that division would have an extra armor. It only works in situations when you're up against minor powers that have barely any attack power. But unfortunately, you need at least 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 armor to make this worthwhile, hence the reason why this meta never really works anymore. The meta that I feel like is for the most part foolproof, but you need a decent amount of military factories to get it going, because you still need a little bit of production to kind of give it that little bit of a push, is the Flamer 2. Now, you can research this from the very start of the game. It will take 2 years to research. However, when you do research it, you will need a few other bits of research on the back of it too. You're going to need the very first 2 army protection techs, but everything else goes pretty checks out. And we will do it based off a heavy tank design, but a medium tank will work quite well. You don't do light tank flames because their stats aren't as good. Here we go. So we hop into here. We're going to go into the basic heavy tank chassis. We're going to state that we don't want a flamer on it. And then the rest is just about stacking lots of armor on it. So we'll stack all the armor possible here. The next other option that's really worth it is if you hop into here, you add on armor skirts, adds a little bit of breakthrough, a little bit of armor, always worthwhile. Now you just need to give it enough speed to actually show it makes it so it actually moves. You want to gain a decent amount of armor with this because it will be proportional based on the amount of tanks that are in the division. If there aren't that many, then they won't gain much armor. But this overall is the best kind you can have. So you need to make it fast enough to go over 4 kilometers per hour. You need to specifically say that this is a bit of a bug, this flamer. There you go, flamer. And then we've got the flame boyo here. You produce these. You don't really need many of them to put in a division. Overall, one heavy flamer equates to 15 per division. So you really don't need to make many of these. So as the game progresses more and more, you want to add more and more armor onto it. The beauty of the interwar heavy tank, this one, and well as the heavy one, is they don't require chromium, but then you will need chromium for the 1940 heavy. And there's a few nations that restrict the amount of chromium they've got, so it kind of becomes a little bit more tricky. But it's just something to be aware of. As the game progresses, you might unlock more and more technologies like these ones, the armor 3 tech, which lets you put extra armor points on there. You might need a little bit of extra engine too as you progress as well, because you'll need the tank to be able to move with the maximum amount of armor on it. And if it's really chugging along, it's not going to gain enough speed to be actually usable. So in this case, you would need the extra engine to actually make it move. Also, as you progress it late game, you can go for sloped armor as well. That's a decent upgrade as well. And also, you can also think about welded armor as well. Only issue with this tank now is getting into the production cost is getting really, really high, from 16.3 to 23.21. But you've reached the end game situation where you're producing these and you've already filled out them with the old versions. Be aware with this one though, you are going to run into a situation where your reliability is not very good, so you might want to go wet ammunition storage, for instance. 80% reliability is probably the minimum you ever really want to do. And now in this circumstance, if you were to add on the flamer to your division, we're going to add on a massive 19 armor. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that there's going to be a lot of situations where the AI might pierce this with a tank destroyer, a regular tank, but for the most part, a lot of the battles aren't going to have all that equipment attached onto the enemy's division, so you're going to have an instance where you'll not be pierced, and therefore these tanks will do lots and lots and lots of damage. This is the easiest way of adding lots of armor to your division that doesn't have a massive cost, doesn't require you to research something way ahead of time. It is the best of the best when it comes down to it. Next up is where you're going to include tanks as an actual part of the division. And I think if you are looking to do what we call the supermarine, where you're adding armor onto an infantry division, you always want to stack as much armor that is possible onto that specific tank division. In this case, you're adding an extra armor on. Sloped armor is an okay addition, but I would only add that on as a late game situation, because overall it costs 10 XP to add on. It increases the cost of the tank by quite a considerable amount. It's something you want to do at the very end, but armor skirts is always generally a win overall. Cast armor is another one of those situations where a bit like sloped armor, which you only really add it on super late game if your production is insane, or if you've got a massive banked amount of heavy tanks, for instance. But overall, welded is decent, and rivet is really good if you want to spit out as many of them as you can and possible. It's pretty insane this, but if you add one of these on to as one battalion, that you've got your perfect Supermarine division. Be aware, there's a few things you can do here to reduce the cost overall, though. For instance, I wouldn't recommend a slow, close support gun. If you really didn't care about the stats, you could add a machine gun because it's super dirty cheap. Got good piercing too overall as well. But best cost effective to get the most soft attack is you want the autocannon or the improved autocannon. There's also other ways you can reduce the cost overall as well. For instance, you go 2-man turret. You could even drop down to a small turret if you really wanted to. A 1-man turrets are pretty decent as well. And overall, that is pretty good. Remove the extra turret. Don't really need a radio. So 19 production costs, which is pretty good. If you go to roughly about 20 production costs for a heavy tank, that's a decent heavy tank overall. When it comes down to adding tanks into divisions, it really doesn't make a great amount of difference adding a light tank over a medium tank. The only big difference between a light tank and a medium tank is the hardness and the kind of turret that you can put on a light tank. Light tanks are restricted to only small armaments. You can't go for mediums or heavies. There are some instances where you can put a heavy on if it's a fixed superstructure, which so in that case you can put a medium armament onto that tank. But overall, it's just really not worth it anyway, because some of the best turrets are light armament ones anyway. But honestly, hand on heart, when it comes down to choosing between a light tank and a medium tank, there really isn't much of a choice there, to be honest with you, in a single player scenario. Once again, the reason you add tanks and the reason why you add tanks onto your divisions themselves is you want to create breakthrough, armor, and hardness. They're your three main stats. Don't worry about hardness because you've got not a lot of control over that one, unless you change the suspension, for instance. Just one thing to note, a recent change that they made is easy maintenance makes the cost of a vehicle cheaper. I'm not running the beta patch right now, but you can't see it. But it's nice to know for future. Easy maintenance will reduce the cost of tanks by 5%. It's not massive, I get that, but overall it adds reliability and it reduces the cost, and it's also pretty cheap. So it's a win-win situation. So if we're talking about a 1939 tank, let's research all the bits we're going to need for that. We'd have the first two armor techs unlocked. We'd have 936 light tank unlocked. And more than likely, you could probably just reach 1940 AA. Could be a good idea to have a little bit of AA. So in this case, it'd be a light tank. This is the light tank you start the game with. You go for the improved autocannon, which is really cost effective. It does really good soft attack, and the production cost is relatively small, which is really good bang for your buck. You want to add them as much breakthrough as you can, so go for the 3-man turret, so it's going to be good. Armor skirts is a really cheap one as well. Welded armor for the armor. Suspension, Bogie suspension will be fine. Add as much armor as you can up to the production cost required. In this case, 9 armor, which is going to be great because it's going to give you a decent amount of armor up to 1939 without getting the future technologies. Breakthrough and your armor are fantastic now. At this point, there's not really much else to add on. I suppose you add easy maintenance to make the cost cheaper, but overall, there really isn't anything extra you want to do. Reduce the engine size. And to be fair, this is a decent 1939 light tank design. It's focusing more on the cost effectiveness. And listen, I know you guys are going to say in the comment, if you want to role play as an SPG, just do it, man. Don't let me to tell you how you make your tanks. You can make your tanks how they're effective, but I'm showing you the most mid-maxy meta style templates overall. And I use something like this very frequently. I do lean slightly towards the mediums just for the extra armor and the extra breakthrough and the extra hardness, but it's not a massive amount. It won't make a great deal of difference. The beauty of light tank design is that you can customize it to give it enough armor to make it just as good as a medium tank anyway. So from my humble opinion, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Once again, if you want to add on heavy tanks as a part of a battalion, it's something you can do, but just be aware the production cost of heavies is significantly more, and that means you can have less of them overall ready for a 1939 scenario or 1940 or 1941. But overall, once again, I'm going to show you the meta designs. So once again, emphasis on cheap armor is the flame boil, this tank. Emphasis on a single battalion, for instance, an infantry, a supermarine, be something, I guess, kind of like this, I suppose. You have to make it kind of like how it would be realistically. Yeah, there you go, 97 armor, so that's a decent amount of armor. And if you wanted to make a light tank that's the equivalent of this, but as a medium instead, just go for this exact same design, but just use a medium chassis instead of a small one. Now, be aware the reliability on this tank is pretty poor because it's an interwar medium tank. I can't remember the last time I made an interwar medium tank, to be fair. But overall, this has some really good armor, and this will do the trick as a part of like a 40 width armor division. I think the way I would naturally always play my games is I naturally always migrate to riveted because it's cheap and you can mass produce tanks. And then when you've got like an excess of these tanks in your stockpile, you move to welded. I'd not usually upgrade, but once overall, as you can see, you're getting a decent amount of extra armor. So I always think it's really worth it. And it runs into a case that you've got like 10,000 tanks stuck in a stockpile, why not go for cast armor and just upgrade the existing ones you've got in the field? That's the way I generally tend to play. There is another design that I've used quite frequently, and that's an AA design to improve anti-air gun, and then you make it an anti-air tank. Be aware, you're losing 70% of your breakthrough with this. So you're taking a massive dip on your breakthrough. So your ability to break through with this division is significantly less. You refer most of your division's firepower to soft attack. I suppose you also lose some soft attack too, because the autocannon's really good, but you're losing like piercing and soft attack. The improved autocannon's really good. But the beauty of this kind of division is now you've got anti-air in your division, so you don't need to support anti-air on that. And if you add 1 battalion of this onto your army, you've got the beauty that you're adding in anti-air onto this division. So you got the ability to push forward and not really care about CAS or fighters for the most part. And there's also an extra beauty is you've also got a little bit of armor as well. Once again, not a massive amount of armor. In a multiplayer situation, 16 armor would be a waste of time. But remember, this is single player. A lot of the time, if you're defeating an enemy and you're beating them up and you're pushing them back, you don't need to really worry too much about really high armor stats, because as the AI loses its, let's say, strength of its divisions, you'll tend to find that their piercing's less, so therefore they'll eventually start to not pierce your divisions. There is another flame tank design that people use quite frequently when they don't want to overly invest into tanks, because for the most part this is a pretty expensive vehicle, and of course this is not something you always want to go for if you can't afford it, particularly if you're a minor nation. If you're Germany or France or the UK or Soviet Union, of course go for it. You get the extra armor. It's a big deal. It's great. You can afford something like that pretty easily. Now if you are looking to invest into flamers to get the bonuses, my advice to you is go for a medium into war flamer. Light turret, 1-man turret will be fine. Yeah, riveted to make it cheap, and that is the design you want to go for. You're probably thinking to yourself, why would you ever want to add this on? This is adding no armor on, no breakthrough. The defense is pathetic. The soft attack is horrendous. Why would you ever make something like this? The reason you're adding this on is not for the stats that this division gives. The reason why you're adding this on is to take advantage of the terrain bonuses. So for instance, if we were to add on the medium flame now, and you hover over it, can you see that at the very bottom? The medium flamer has extra movement speed, extra attack into forts, attack into rivers, attack into amphibious, attack into forests, attack into hills, blah, 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 blah. For some reason, the light flamer got nerfed in the previous patch, and some of these extra bonuses that you get attacking terrain types were significantly nerfed, and the sweet spot now is the medium flamer, and this is so unbelievably cheap. It doesn't even increase the cost of the vehicle significantly much anyway. And remember, you made this medium flamer on a budget, so overall now you're taking advantage of the extra attack abilities. We're not really damaging the stats, and overall you're making something that's really dirty cheap anyway. You can assign like 2 or 3 mils onto medium flamer, and for the rest of the game you're good to go, because you don't really need to produce that many anyway. I feel like a lot of the time, guys, I don't want to just give you guys tank designs and be like, make this design and you will win your games. No, you need to be learning why you make tanks and why you make them certain ways and why they're effective in certain scenarios. So at the end of the day, you're making tanks for the specific 3 reasons. Can you remember the 3 reasons? You want hardness, you want armor, you want breakthrough. For the most part, you have control over armor and breakthrough. In that case, you can adjust the turret. In this case, you can add on a bigger armament. You can affect armor and breakthrough by changing the different kinds of armor on your tank too. You can add extra points of armor on to give extra breakthrough. You tend to find, this is a general rule of thumb, this is always a rule that breaks the rule, you don't really need anything more than 100 armor on a tank. It tends to be that the AI isn't very good at making division templates, so therefore that really won't even help you overall. So I wouldn't really recommend going over 100 armor for a single division, but it all depends on how much armor is actually on the division itself, because this is the tank itself. And remember, the whole division doesn't have generally that level of armor on it. In this case, you can see here, get on the heavy flamer, the armor here is 25, even though this tank probably has significantly more armor because it's a very heavily armored flamer. There are certain stats in game that you can never really have too much of. That's the reason why whenever you see me in my Let's Plays, I always tend to make those specific kinds of tank. And for instance, you can never have too much breakthrough and you can never have too much soft attack. So I tend to be adding lots and lots of armor onto my tanks just to maximize the amount of breakthrough you eventually get. There are some choices you can make with your modules that will improve your tanks to a massive degree. For instance, I'm not a big fan of the big turrets as well. For instance, I think they're a little bit too expensive. They cost too much tungsten and chromium. So I tend to be against those ones as well. But once again, if you're in a late game situation, you've got lots of production, that's an option for you, you know? I suppose the only rule that I feel like doesn't kind of work is SPGs. SPGs are a little bit strange because they're an artillery tank. So you lose some of the bonuses that tanks get, such as breakthrough. It actually uses extra supply as well, which is kind of annoying. You lose hardness as well. It doesn't tell you about that as well, which is kind of annoying as well. But what you're doing is you're using it as a trade-off to gain more soft attack. And what happens over time is you will gain passive bonuses to your SPG tanks by going for these. See these SPG bonuses down here? You 5%, 5%, 5%. Overall, you gain quite a lot of extra passive bonuses to your SPGs. And that can overall results in quite a lot of extra soft attack. Like, for instance, this first one here, Interwar Artillery, adds an additional 15 extra soft attack onto SPGs. That's insane. I never knew it was that high. In this case, this tank does 25 soft attack. If I was to research all the artillery techs, it goes from 25 to 33.7. Remember, soft attack is the stat that you use to break through infantry divisions. And universally, it's like your normal attack in HOI4. So for the most part, you can never really have too much soft attack. And you can never have too much breakthrough too. I just think it's strange, though, adding SPGs into your division. Because at the end of the day, you're adding SPGs because you want armor and hardness, but you lose hardness. And they're more expensive because they need a bigger turret. So I never really understood how it fits into the game. Another one is tank destroyers too. I think a lot of people like to LARP and make tank destroyers. But generally, I'm not really a big fan of tank destroyers either. The only other wacky other design I can think of that's a bit different is an amphibious tank. When you get the amphibious drive, you can add this onto any tank you want to and make an amphibious tank version. Small cannon. Yeah, there you go. Amphibious. Oh, you actually lose some stats. I didn't even know that. You lose some breakthrough, you lose some hardness. But the beauty of this, it means that when you're attacking into rivers or wetlands, you gain an attack bonus. A quite big one too as well. Just to summarize, once again, make the tanks that you can afford based on the country you're playing as, and try to understand that there isn't a one tank that's good for everything. You have to build the tank up as the game progresses by gaining XP and level up that tank design to the one that is most ideal for the situation you're going to be fighting in. Wow! Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want more min-maxing guides, let me know. The next video is this one. Ooh, click this one for the next one. Bye.